What is up, Aztec fans? This is going to be the trial run of a possible Aztec Breakdown podcast. I also just felt like I wanted to just talk about everything from this last season and the coming season, and there's just a lot on my mind, and it's kind of driving me crazy, and I wanted to get it out there, and so I thought this might be a way to do that. I apologize just right off the bat for any awful sound quality that this is definitely going to have. I don't have a good place in my house to record. I don't really have a great microphone. If you've watched my YouTube videos, you probably know that. So just apologies. Bear with me, and hopefully it's not too bad. I probably should have wrote more of a script, but I'm just going to kind of riff for just a while and see where this goes. I guess first we'll just talk about the thing that's probably on everybody's mind, Jalen. Jalen McDaniels. What happens with Jalen? And the most realistic answer is I don't know. And I think that's probably the answer for most everybody, and probably to a certain extent, even Jalen himself doesn't quite know yet. We can be pretty sure that he wants to go to the NBA, and who can blame him? Right? And he waited till the last minute to pull his name out of the draft last year. This year will probably be very similar, meaning we won't know until that deadline passes on whether he'll stay in the draft or not. The thing with Jalen is he did improve a lot from last year to this year. Last season, he was very much just a hustle player. You know, he was tall, he had a high motor. Most of his scores came off of things like putbacks and cuts and dump offs and things like that. He did show some ability to shoot from like the elbows, especially against a zone in his freshman season. This year he showed more than that. He showed some ball handling skills. He showed some skills down in the post. I, especially early in the season, loved the way he facilitated out of the post. The other team would bring a double against him. He would pass it and find an open man, and that was great. So his facilitating got better. His ball handling, his shooting. He hit some threes this year. He was able to hit mid ranges pretty well. He did falter in some of the biggest games, which was tough, but it kind of was the way much of the team went, especially on the offensive end late in the year. Just is what it is. He had a good year overall. He broke the record for double doubles in a row, I believe it was, or was it all together? I don't remember right now. So somebody can shout me out and let me know. Um, but overall, I think he had a good year. He definitely showed improvement from last year. My concern would be I don't know if it's the type of improvement NBA scouts would have wanted to see necessarily. And that's not to say that it would be bad. That's not to say that these scouts are there thinking like, oh no, he got better, but in bad ways, so we're not going to draft him. It's not that at all. I think his draft stock should be higher this year than it was last year. But last year it seemed like it was a borderline second round pick. This year might be higher. It might be like guaranteed second round pick. You know, somebody that a team might just take a flyer on in the second round and get him in an NBA weight room and get him in a situation where he doesn't have to focus on taking classes and he can just focus on basketball all day, every day, and see where he goes from there. But I don't know, and that's the truth. You kind of hope that he comes back for one more year, but that has problems in and of itself. You know, who knows if the Aztecs, Malik Pope might be the best example. Winston Shepard, to a certain extent, might be an example of this too. But if they get these 4 and 5 star players that are supposed to go pro after a couple years, and then they don't, and they keep on not going pro, does that bode well for the Aztecs as a program? I don't know. And I think I wrote about that at some point earlier this season or last season, something like that. It's tricky, and there's all these different unknown ramifications to all these things. But I think in the short run, you hope that Jalen stays, and you hope that that helps motivate his younger brother Jaden to commit and come to San Diego State. That could be a pretty crazy 1-2 punch, especially if Jalen can be more consistent in his junior year. That would be pretty crazy. I think overall this season, for me, it's tough to say because I'm not going to lie, doing this stuff that I've been trying to do with all the data and all the film study and stuff, at a certain point, it kind of started to take the fun out of the season for me. And I'm not sure how much of that was all the losing versus how much of it was just I put too much on my plate. It was probably some of both. But overall, this season was a disappointment. And to be fair, at the end of the season, like going into that Utah State game, especially in the Mountain West Championship, those of you who follow me on Twitter definitely saw me. I put out a tweet saying something along the lines of like, I'm just trying really hard to not get my hopes up for this game. That way, if they lose, I'm not too disappointed. So that was a big part of what I was doing leading up to it. But just watching the fight that the guys showed during that game, and especially the two seniors, which makes sense, but really everybody, how they fought and they clawed to try and get that win. I think it would be safe to say that the Aztecs wanted that win more, and that makes sense because Utah State was probably going to be in the tournament even if they lost, and the Aztecs weren't, obviously. I think most objective Utah State fans would say at the end it looked like the Aztecs wanted it more, but Utah State was objectively the better team for the whole season, let alone just that game. So that was, it was nice to see that type of fight, and on that level, I don't know if that level would necessarily be, I don't know if they could play with that type of fight and energy over the course of a whole season. That might wear guys down, and that might cause injuries and things like that. But if they could play, 80 or 90% of that over the course of the whole season, then they can start probably eliminating some of these bad losses. If they had won on the road against Air Force, and I think on the road against Cal were probably, when I looked at the computer metrics, the two worst losses of the season. And if they had eliminated those, it doesn't mean that they get into the NCAA tournament, but their rankings are better. Maybe they're at least on the bubble for the NIT. I don't know for sure. I can't do the math. I don't know the formulas for how it all works, but eliminating those two for sure. If you were going to eliminate any two, those would have been the two I would have chosen. And just would have made the season better overall. They would have had a higher ranking, all that stuff. Heading into the season, my prediction was an NIT berth. I didn't think this team was going to be as good as last season's. And last season's team, had they lost in the championship game, they wouldn't have made the NCAA tournament, but they likely would have made the NIT. And so I figured NIT is probably a pretty safe bet for this season too, which I know for many would have been a disappointment. But it seemed more realistic than like, oh, Sweet 16 or anything like that. So even from that point of view, not even making the NIT was a disappointment. Hopefully, the players as well as the coaches will take a lot of the lessons they learned from this year and help carry it over to next year. A lot of us as fans were very frustrated with things like Dutch's starting lineup for the first however many games, 15 games or whatever, was a small starting lineup, and his reasoning was always that these are the 5 best players on the team, which was probably accurate, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that they're going to be the best 5-man unit and that doesn't mean you want that unit out there for most of the game. It's one thing to be the best player, it's another thing to work well with all the other best players, I guess. Um, that team definitely needed a true big man in there defensively. And Nathan was that big man. And once they put Nathan in, things got a lot better. I haven't finished my lineup data or my on-off data for the individual players yet. I'm getting close, but once Nathan got in the starting lineup, things got a lot better. The offense got better, the defense got better, and it just helped slide everything into place. Jalen got to play at the 4 instead of the 5, which is a more natural position for him. Matt got to play at the 3 instead of the 4, which is a more natural position for him. So it just slid things into place. And hopefully this coming season, the coaches will be able to use lessons like that and other lessons and get off to a stronger start. Because that's really what it needs to be in a lot of ways. It's just if the Aztecs can start off not where they finished this year necessarily, because stuff like that takes time, but they need to start off faster than they have for the last 2 or 3 years, even going back to Steve Fisher. They've just started slow. And I don't mean they need to start faster like they need to beat Duke in that 3rd game or Iowa State in that 5th game, because those were really good teams, but they need to not lose to Cal. They need to not lose ideally to San Diego, but San Diego finished like 80-something in Ken Palm. That's not a killer loss. It's not a good loss. There's no good losses. But it's not the loss that everybody makes it out to be. I think people get emotional of that because it's just San Diego. And I get it, but the computers don't say it's a bad loss, and the selection committee uses the computers to influence their choices, and they don't have that same emotional attachment to like, oh, the Aztecs are better than the Toreros or anything like that. They're just going to look at the numbers. But don't lose to Cal, don't lose to Air Force, don't lose to Brown at home. Start off faster and eliminate some of those losses, and then even if those early wins against the Duke and the Iowa States and stuff don't come, your resume will look better just because you don't have any losses. Or any bad losses at the very least. And so that's probably, if not the number one thing, that's probably like the top 2 or 3 things that I'm going to be looking for once this next season starts. Is, can the team start off faster, and can the team eliminate some of these bad losses? Maybe not even 100% of them, because teams have off nights and things happen, and I get it. But at least the vast majority of them. Eliminate these bad losses, and your sheet will be cleaner, and you'll get off to a better start. And if you start faster, if these teams keep progressing the way Dutch has had them progress over the last 2 years, like they get a lot better over the course of the year, it seems like. And so if they can start at a higher point, then hopefully they'll be able to end at a higher point too. And that just bodes well for if they can make the tourney next year. I saw on Facebook somebody said the loss to University of San Diego cost the Aztecs the season. I don't agree with that. Like I said, their ranking in Ken Palm isn't that bad. I don't remember their net ranking off the top of my head, but Ken Palm and the net are pretty close in general. So their ranking in the net, they're probably a top 100 team, which means that's a quad 2 loss. So that's not a bad loss in terms of the computers. One of the other things, probably if slow starts is number 1 or 2, this next thing would be the other 1 or 2, is how do the players develop? And over the past 2 years that I've been doing this, I feel like for the most part, from year to year, the players that the Aztecs don't get much better. And there's any number of possible reasons for that. I don't know how much players on other teams get better necessarily either. But I look over at Boise State, for example, and they had Chandler Hutchinson for those 4 years, and he got better every year. And then they had the guy whose name I can't remember right now. but in Boise, he lit up the Aztecs for like his first 30-point game of his career or whatever it was. And he was another player who last year didn't play much, didn't have a big impact, and then this year was a lot better, right? And I don't feel like we see that as Aztec fans. And maybe I just can't think of an example of the last time that something like that happened. But I feel like for the most part, the players stay pretty consistent. They might get a little bit better in a couple areas, but then they also get a little bit worse in a couple other areas. I feel like for the most part, they just stay consistent. And so a lot of us are talking about, hey, like, I can't wait till next year when these freshmen and these sophomores are another year better, when Nathan gets a full off season to work on his game, and when Agwet gets a full off season to work on his game, because those two were banged up a lot of this off season, things like that. And I'm a little hesitant about that, and I don't want to be. I want to be like, absolutely, these guys should get better every year. They show a lot of desire to be better. And having a full off season to work on strength and conditioning and technique and all that stuff should be great. But I'm hesitant to say it will be, just because I can't think of many times where a player got significantly better. And I was really hoping somebody like Jordan Shackle would make a leap like that this year and just shoot the lights out. And he started off pretty strong when he was starting. He was shooting pretty well. And towards the end of the season, that fell off. And it's possible he was hurt for a couple weeks, and they tried to rush him back, and he played a game and it was too early, and so he sat out another game or two. It's possible that injury affected him to the end of the season. But, Jordan Shackle is probably the biggest gym rat on this team, by all the accounts that I've seen at least, to the point where the coaches need to tell him to get out of the gym because he's going to overwork himself. And so I was hoping for a big leap from him in one way, shape, or form, whether that was adding shooting off of screens as opposed to just spot-up shooting, whether that was being able to handle the ball better, whether that was being able to finish inside better, whether that was facilitating for other players, whether that was defensively, whatever the case may be. I was hoping to see some type of leap. And that's not to say he didn't get any better. He was probably a little better in his sophomore year than he was his freshman year, but I didn't think it was huge. It wasn't a giant jump. Maybe a giant jump can come in his junior year, hopefully, but I'm just hesitant for really all the players, and I'm not sure how much of that is on the players. In Jordan Shackle's case, it doesn't seem like it would be on the players. How much that player development on an individual level like that might just be a weakness of this coaching staff, and they would need to bring somebody else in to do that. I don't have any names of who to bring in. I would want to know whoever's in charge of player development at Boise State, honestly. But I don't know how exactly that gets fixed. Or maybe it's just, hopefully I'm proven wrong. Hopefully a couple of these players come out next year and you can tell that they're a lot better. Nathan comes out, he doesn't foul as much. He's able to score a little bit easier in the post, because I don't have faith in his post game yet, but hopefully next year that comes. Hopefully Agwet can score off of more than just hustle plays. Hopefully, like I said, Jordan improves. All those things. But right now, I'm just not sure about it. So I have two more things for sure that kind of go hand in hand. Another thing I've seen floating out over the interwebs, and it comes up like almost every single game that the Aztecs lose that they probably shouldn't lose. Somebody will say something along these lines, but somebody will say something along the lines of, this program needs to go back to recruiting 1-star players instead of 3, 4, 5-star players, and getting transfers from other teams that weren't good enough for those other teams, so transfer them to San Diego State. And I get why they say that. I get that the history, when this team started, turning around and becoming more relevant, it was built on players like that. You got the players like the J.J. O'Briens that came from another team and came here and killed it. Xavier Thames was a transfer from another school, players like that. I get it. I don't think that's the way to go, though. And the reason would be why. I'm not saying don't take transfers from other schools. When Malachi Flynn decided to transfer to San Diego State, I was ecstatic because that kid can ball. And I guess I can talk about him in a little bit too. But, if a transfer is good, absolutely take him. But I don't think, especially on the account of like, let's only recruit 1 and 2 star players because they'll be hungry and they'll want to fight for it. Like, 4 and 5 star players want to fight for it too. Like, you're not gonna go up. You got Zion Williamson this year. You're not gonna go up and tell him he doesn't want to fight for it. He had his injury earlier this season, and a bunch of people were telling him he should just sit out the rest of the season in order to save however many millions of dollars in case he gets injured again. He's like, no, I'm gonna go play. That's what he does. He wants to go play, and you're not gonna tell him he doesn't fight for it. Like, the dude's a monster. And so this notion that only 1-star players care about getting better and only 1-star players have like this gritty attitude, like, no, miss me with that. And how many programs? There's 353 Division I basketball programs. How many of them are built on 1 and 2-star recruits, and how many of those programs that are built on that make it to the tournament every year? The answer to that is probably like 200, 250 of them are built off of 1 and 2-star recruits, probably somewhere in that range. And how many of those make it to the NCAA tournament every year consistently? Probably none of them. Like, I mean, like I said, I get it. I get where the sentiment is coming from, but it's wrong. And I mean, in a lot of things, like, I have an open mind and I'm like, listen, I don't agree with it, but like, I get it, and so it's okay. But like, this is just wrong. Like, you're not going to go back to recruiting 1-star players and all of a sudden be in the NCAA tournament every year again. It's not going to happen. It's kind of miraculous that it happened at San Diego State at all, And, anyways, I don't know. I mean, even if you want to get picky about it, like the first Sweet 16, the star player was Kawhi Leonard, and he might not have been seen as valuable as he would become, maybe, but I think on 247 Sports, he's still like the 3rd or 4th highest rated recruit that the Aztecs ever got. So it's not like he was a 1-star. He was at least a 3 or 4-star by most places. And so, like, even the notion that this program was built on these gritty 1-star players, like, no. Were there gritty 1-star players? Absolutely. I'm not saying that there weren't, but there was still star power behind it, And I haven't looked. I should probably look and see what some of these transfers were, what they were rated when they came out. The Xavier Thames, the J.J. O'Briens, people like that transferred over. But my bet is that most of them wouldn't have been 1-star players either. And they went to a school and then they didn't get along with the coaches, or there were other better players in front of them, and so they came to San Diego State and then killed it. Whatever the case is, I don't know. But I don't know. I get kind of hyped when I see that. Like, it's ridiculous. It's a bad process. We got lucky with it once. It's not likely to happen again. And I mean, I guess you could say look at Nevada, what they did with transfers, but they didn't do that with transfers and 1-star prospects. They did that with transfers that were 3 or 4-star prospects that, like I said, went to other schools, and then something happened, and so Musk got them all to Nevada, and now they have a good team. And even the players that aren't playing, like Nevada just got a 5-star prospect for this season, and I don't think he played very much, but they got it. Like, they're not building that program off of 1-star high school kids. It's just ridiculous. Moving on from that is Jaden McDaniels. What's he gonna do? And similar to what I talked about with Jalen, I don't know. I don't think anybody truly knows. I remember hearing from people that like heard from other people that heard from an actual source type thing, that At the time, this was earlier when the season was like just beginning, maybe it was a couple weeks in. At the time, what it was Jaden's mom wanted him to commit to Washington. That way he would be close to home, which makes perfect sense and nobody could fault him for doing that. I think it was his dad was, I don't remember what his dad was. His dad might have preferred SDSU, or he might have been like either SDSU or Washington is fine. But it was something like that, right? So like that was a thing. But basically it was all the signs at the time were pointing to either Washington or San Diego State, which is good for the Aztecs. And then just the other day I posted on Twitter, there were 5 experts on 247 Sports that made a prediction about where he would go. 2 of them said Washington, 2 of them said San Diego State, and 1 of them said Kentucky, I believe it was. So that's boding okay for the Aztecs. If the Aztecs got him, he probably becomes the highest rated recruit in Aztecs history, which is pretty cool. I haven't seen much of his game besides highlights. I don't do too much looking at high school players until they commit because there's enough other stuff for me to be doing between watching the live games and watching tape of other players who have committed and stuff like that. There's enough work for me to do that I'm not going to spend a bunch of time scouting a player until they commit. But regardless, it would be a huge pickup. It could be very cool to see the 2 McDaniels brothers play together. Even if it's just for 1 year and then they both leave, that would still be pretty cool. I would worry a little bit about how they would fit together. It seems like they're both more of like a power forward type of player, just from like the few things I've read. And obviously, like I've seen Jalen. Jalen's absolutely, he's more of a power forward type of player. I don't know about Jaden. Hopefully, if Jaden was to commit, he could play some small forward. That would be the ideal. Because if not, then you're having to mix stuff around. You're having to play probably one of them at center, and we saw that with Jalen this year. That wasn't very good, and Nathan Mensah was the biggest impact player on the team, according to like the plus-minus stats that I've been keeping track of. I think I'm through the regular season. I think I still need to do the conference tournament, and the team is 25 points per 100 possessions better when he's on the floor as opposed to when he's off. So if you're taking him off, like that's a problem. Unless Jaden is going to make up for those 25 points, which as good as he isn't super likely. A lot of this, when you're this high in the rankings and when you're an NBA prospect, a lot of it isn't on current skill as it is future potential. And so even if Jaden is a top 5 pick, it doesn't necessarily mean he's the best player right now. It doesn't necessarily mean he's the best player on his team right now. It means in a couple years he should be really good. But it is what it is. So if you have to play one of them at the 5, you're pulling Nathan out. That's bad. You keep Nathan in. One of them has to play the 3. I'm not sure if either of them could do it. Hopefully Jaden could. I don't think Jalen really has that ability. That's something I guess we can cross that bridge when we get to it. That would be like the one potential drawback, and that would be a good problem to have in the long run, but it is what it is. That's most of it. I guess I can talk about some of these incoming players. I've looked at one game of Kashad Johnson playing, the high school kid that the Aztecs picked up, and he looked solid. I don't know how much he would contribute in his first year necessarily. He looked solid though. He played mostly mostly center type position in high school, which makes sense because he's normally the biggest player on the floor. So that makes sense. At San Diego State, he would need to be more of either a 3 or a 4, a small forward or a power forward. He's just raw. He seemed very athletic to me, not hyper athletic, but very athletic. He showed some skills. He showed some ability to shoot and finish and defend and all that stuff. But he was pretty raw, so I would feel like he would probably need a year before he could contribute much. Maybe even a redshirt year. I'm not sure. So there's that, and that was all just based off of one game. So who knows? But that's what I got on him. Malachi Flynn, I'm super excited for. Malachi Flynn, to me, even if Jaden comes, Malachi Flynn is probably the best player on the team. Not the most potential, like I said earlier. He wouldn't have as much potential as Jaden, but he's probably the best player on the team right now. He won't be Devin Watson 2.0. That is not a thing. He doesn't play like Devin Watson in my mind. Devin Watson is pretty much a scoring guard, and he could facilitate absolutely, especially in his senior year, but he was largely a scoring guard, and he shot the lights out of the ball a lot of the time. Malachi Flynn is a career shooter of like 34% or something like that, right? Which is about average. So Malachi isn't the best shooter. He's not super athletic, I didn't think. I've watched a couple of games of him, and I'm going to do a video on him on the off season. He's not super athletic. He's athletic enough to get by, obviously, but he seemed to me to be more of a player that got by on his skill and his IQ as opposed to his athleticism, which is something pretty different for San Diego State players, but I'm kind of excited for it. He was good at facilitating. He seemed good at scoring inside and cutting and all types of things like that. He seemed like a solid enough defender, and I'll have to relook up his synergy numbers and stuff like that again to see how that went. But his POE, his points over expectation, which uses those synergy numbers from his his sophomore year at Washington, if I plug that into the all-time Aztecs POE that goes back, I think right now to like the 2011 season, his POE would have been like the third highest of all time, which just means he's crazy efficient, right? Both on offense and defense. Like, he gets stops on defense and he scores the ball very efficiently, right? So possessions don't get wasted. And that's just on his scoring and his individual defense. The version of POE that I have doesn't account for his like passing or his help defense or anything like that. But I'm very excited for him. I think he will be the starting point guard next year for sure. And then the newest recruit is KJ Fegan, who I have a couple games of his saved. I haven't looked at them yet. I'll be doing a video on him on the offseason too. When I looked at his synergy numbers, he was really efficient offensively. I think it was like the high 70s or the low 80s percentile offensively, just meaning he's better than, like 78 or 82% or whatever of players at scoring the ball efficiently in college basketball. So that's really good. He's an offensive powerhouse. His defense overall was like 8th percentile, which means he was only better than 8% of all players at defending. And so he's not a defensive stopper in the slightest. And that has me a little bit worried. I think he will definitely get plenty of playing time because right now the only other true ball handler is Malachi, and you need another ball handler. And that's something, hopefully Matt or Jordan or somebody can work on their ball handling and become a third person. But right now it's just Malachi and KJ. And that's okay. I don't, just based off of those numbers, like I said, I haven't watched the tape or anything yet, but just based off of those numbers, I don't think KJ should be in the starting lineup. And I've seen a lot of fans be very excited about KJ Fegan playing probably the 2 with Malachi Flynn at the 1, and then, some combination of like Jaden at the 3, Jalen at the 4, and then Nathan at the 5. I think if Jaden comes, that would be great, but I wouldn't have KJ at the 2. I would probably have him be like a 6-man, or even if not a 6-man, just like the offensive spark plug off the bench. Whatever spot you want to put that player in, however many minutes you want to give him. Probably like 12 to 15, somewhere in that range. And he just, like, his job is when the offense slows down, he can come in and get a bucket. And that's what he does. And that's just because of those defensive deficiencies. And when I look at the tape, maybe I'll see something different and I'll change my mind. But for right now, That's what I would think. I'll be interested to see if any of the coaches are leaving for one reason or another, and then if they do, who comes back. Sorry, not who comes back. That would be a lead into like should Marvin Menzies come back, which could be cool. It seemed like he had his team getting better every year, which is what you want. So if a spot opens up, I don't think bringing Marvin back would be the worst thing. But if somebody leaves, who comes in? If nobody leaves, then okay. That's mostly what I got for right now. I think the last thing I'll do for these last couple minutes is talk about the future of the Mountain West as a whole. And I'm not going to pretend to be like super educated about how all these things work, with like TV deals and things like that. I'm not going to talk about that so much. Just like the quality of the teams. And it's tough because last season, for example, in Dutch's first season, Dutch was a first-year head coach, and then the guy at New Mexico, whose name I'm blanking on, Paul Weir. So you have Dutcher and Paul Weir. It was both their first years, and they were both pretty successful overall, which seemed to bode well. Even if, like I said earlier, last year's Aztec team, they only made the tourney because they won their conference tournament, but even if they hadn't, they probably would have made the NIT, so it would have been okay. That's a solid season. It's disappointing probably in the end, but it's a solid season. It's one I would have accepted. And then Paul Weir had his team doing good, and they weren't going to make the tourney, and I don't think they even made the NIT. They didn't, but they seemed like they could. It was something they could build off of, And then this year, they fell off, and so did San Diego State, and so it was two first-year head coaches that had solid first years, and then worse off second years. And this year, we have that same thing. We have Justin Hutson out at Fresno State, and let's see, his team has finished 72nd in KenPom. They probably could have been invited to the NIT. I don't know who they would have had to replace to do that, but it wouldn't have been unprecedented to have them in the NIT, and that's in their first year. And I'm looking at their roster, they have a couple seniors, a couple of their starters are seniors, so they'll have to replace them. They have 3 starters that are seniors and 2 that are juniors, and so they'll have a couple players to replace. So that'll be interesting to see how that goes. By all accounts, Justin Hutson should be able to recruit well, especially in the Fresno area. And so, in theory, they should be fine. And then there's also Utah State, which would have made the tournament probably as an at-large team anyways. They didn't need to because they beat the Aztecs, obviously, but they probably would have made it anyways. And they have one starter who's a senior and one other player who's a senior, and that other player didn't play a whole lot of minutes. And so they'll have a lot of carryover, and their best players, Sam Merrill is a junior, Nemius Keita is a junior, not a junior, he's a freshman, and so if neither of them leave for the draft, which I feel like they wouldn't, but what do I know? I don't know these things, but if neither of them leave, that's your core right there. And then they got Brock Miller as a freshman. He hit all those threes against the Aztecs. I'm pretty sure that was him. And so they have a solid returning cast here. And so they got Craig Smith as their coach. Seeing if these 2 first-year head coaches can carry the success over into next year will be very interesting. I thought the Mountain West was heading in the right direction after last season. Paul Weir kind of disappointed me, and Dutch to a certain extent did too. I do think Dutch for the moment can get back. It'll just depend on if they can get a fast start, like I said. If that fast start doesn't come, then I'll start thinking about, does this team need a new coach? This team being the Aztecs. But in the meantime, Craig Smith looks legit, and his history at South Dakota bodes well for Utah State. Hutson looks legit for the moment. Musselman is definitely legit. I might think he's a bit of a spaz, on the court. He doesn't seem like a very nice guy, but when I've heard him talk like on podcasts and interviews and stuff, he seems nice enough. He seems like he works well with his staff, and especially like his grad assistants all really love him. Regardless, this isn't the Musselman Love show. He's a good coach, and there's rumors about him leaving for another school. If I had to guess right now, I would say that's not going to happen, but he might. It's better for the conference if he doesn't. That being said, they like all five of their starters were seniors this year, and so they're going to have a lot of talent to replace. Their one rotation player that isn't graduating is Jazz Johnson, who will be a senior next year. Shoot, even some of their bench players look like they're seniors. And so they're going to have a lot of talent that they have to replace. I don't know what they have coming in or anything like that, but that's a thing. So all this is just to say I feel like overall with these group of coaches, the Mountain West has a good foundation to be a better conference overall. I say that with the disclaimer that I kind of felt that way last year between Paul Weir and Dutch and Musselman. So I've been wrong before, take it with a grain of salt. There's also Leon Rice who had a down year this year. I liked the Colorado State coach too, Nico Medved. Now, I don't know if he'll actually do anything. They just started off pretty well is all. So maybe he can do something coming into his second and third years. But Leon Rice at Boise is solid. Dutch, for all his flaws, is at least a solid coach, probably, and then you got Hudson at Fresno. You got, like I said, Craig Smith at Utah State, and you got Musselman at Nevada. And there should be 3 pretty good coaches out of that, which means you should have 3 pretty solid teams every year to carry the conference. All of this in theory, but it looks like the Mountain West should be heading up, and it's possible that getting, if all these coaches can stay for a little while, for like 5 years, Dutch definitely isn't going anywhere. Hudson probably won't go anywhere for a while. And Craig Smith, this was his first year, so hopefully he can stay for a couple more years. Hopefully Musselman doesn't leave for at least a couple more years. If that can happen, the Mountain West, I feel like, should be able to go on a little run of 2 and maybe even sometimes 3 bid seasons if these coaches can stay here and can keep having success. It's a lot of ifs, but I'm just hopeful for the direction the Mountain West is heading, basically, is all I'm saying there. That should do it for this little trial run. I know it's long, but I remember driving the streets in California, and people would always say, we're going to try and limit this podcast to 30 minutes, 45 max. And I was like, no, I need more. My commute's an hour and a half. So hopefully it doesn't bother anybody. Let me know. Hit me up on Twitter or YouTube or whatever. If there's anything I missed that you'd like me to talk about, any counterpoints you'd like to make. I don't claim to be the know-all everything. There's definitely layers that I miss and lenses to look through that I don't even know existed, and other opinions that are absolutely rational. The only difference between me and most fans is I just watch most of the games more than once. That's about it. So definitely hit me up, like, share, subscribe on YouTube, follow on Twitter, all that good stuff. I'm going to try and get this podcast type deal on iTunes. I'm going to see how it goes. If not, I'll probably just post it on YouTube, and that'll be that. But yeah, until next time, Aztec fans.